March 9, 1945. The air over the Pacific is not just cold, it is a physical barrier, a wall of rushing jet streams moving at 200 miles an hour. In the darkness, 334 silver giants are clawing their way into the sky. They are B-29 superfortresses, the most expensive, complex, and technologically advanced machines the United States has ever built. They are designed to fly at 30,000 feet in the thin, silent air, dropping high explosives with mathematical precision. They are designed to be safe. They are designed to be clean. But tonight, they are not flying at 30,000 feet. They are flying at 5,000. They are skimming the waves. They are not carrying high explosives. They are packed to the bursting point with gelid gasoline. And most terrifying of all, they are naked. The guns are gone. The ammunition is gone. The gunners have been left behind. The man who ordered this did not sleep tonight. He sits alone in a Quonset hut on the island of Guam, chewing a cigar that has long since gone out. He is the loneliest man in the Pacific theater. He knows that if this gamble fails, he isn't just fired. He isn't just disgraced. He will be responsible for the single greatest loss of American life in aviation history. He knows that the pilots hate him. He knows his superiors in Washington think he has lost his mind. He is waiting for a code word, a single phrase that will tell him if he is a genius or a butcher. Tonight, we are going to walk through the mind of Curtis LeMay. We are going to deconstruct the agonizing, solitary process that led to the most destructive air raid in the history of mankind. We are going to look at how one man, facing a three-tiered wall of rejection, fabricated a strategy out of desperation that increased casualty rates by 400% in a single night. This is not a story about bombs. It is a story about the crushing weight of command and the terrible price of being right. To understand the decision, you have to understand the machine. The B-29 was a miracle. It was pressurized. It had remote-controlled turrets. It was built for a specific doctrine, high-altitude precision daylight bombing. This was the religion of the American Army Air Forces. The idea was noble. You don't carpet bomb a city, you fly high above the flak, and you drop a bomb right down the smokestack of a munitions factory. You kill the machine, not the people. That was the dream. Curtis LeMay was sent to the Pacific to make that dream a reality. But when he arrived, he met an enemy he couldn't shoot, the jet stream. In late 1944, no one really understood high-altitude weather patterns over Japan. When LeMay's pilots got to 30,000 feet, they hit winds of 200 miles per hour. Their bomb sights, the famous Norden bomb sights that cost as much as a house, were useless. The wind took the bombs and scattered them like confetti. For 3 months, LeMay tried. He was a relentless pragmatist. He drilled his men. He flew the missions himself. He demanded perfection. But the statistics were a disaster. They were hitting the target less than 5% of the time. The Japanese war machine was churning out fighters and munitions untouched, and the casualty rates for the Americans were climbing. Engines were overheating trying to fight the wind. Japanese fighters were waiting for them. LeMay sat in his office, staring at the strike photos. Blur, cloud, miss, miss, miss. He felt the walls closing in. This brings us to the first tier of rejection, the doctrine. The entire military establishment was built on the promise of precision. To abandon it was heresy. It was admitting that the billions of dollars spent on the B-29's technology were effectively wasted. LeMay knew that if he changed tactics, he was admitting that the Air Force was wrong. Then came the second tier of rejection, the clock. Washington was screaming for results. The invasion of Japan was looming, Operation Downfall. The projections for casualties were in the millions. The generals in the Pentagon needed the B-29s to pave the way, to break the Japanese industrial back. Every day LeMay failed, the invasion got closer. He received letters from General Arnold, his boss. They weren't angry letters, they were worse. They were disappointed. They asked, "When will we see results?" LeMay felt the isolation of the commander. He wasn't one of the boys. He didn't drink with the pilots. He was the Iron Eagle, the demon. He didn't speak much. He had a palsy in his face that made him look like he was always snarling. But behind that snarl was a mind that worked like an engineer's slide rule. He began to look at the problem differently. If the wind at 30,000 feet is the enemy, don't go there, go under it. But going low presented the third tier of rejection, the fear. The B-29 was a huge target. If you fly it at 5,000 feet, you are within range of everything: heavy flak, light flak, machine guns, rifles, even a lucky pistol shot. To ask a crew to take a pressurized spaceship designed for the stratosphere and fly it at treetop level was considered suicide. The pilots were terrified of the idea, so LeMay found himself in a box. The technology didn't work. The bosses were impatient. The crews were afraid. Most commanders would have doubled down. They would have pushed harder on the old strategy to protect their careers. They would have blamed the weather. They would have asked for more planes. LeMay did something else. He retreated into silence. This is the moment of the midnight fabrication. It wasn't a fabrication of metal, but of logic. It is early March. LeMay is alone in his quarters. He pulls out the technical manuals of the B-29. He starts doing math on a notepad. He looks at the weight of the aircraft. He looks at the weight of the fuel. He looks at the weight of the bombs. He realizes that to burn Japanese cities, which were made largely of wood and paper, he didn't need high explosives. He needed incendiaries, specifically the M69, a cluster of oil and napalm pipe bombs, but he needed volume. He needed to create a firestorm, a self-sustaining cyclone of heat that would consume the oxygen and burn everything, regardless of accuracy. To do that, he needed to carry twice the bomb load. But the plane couldn't carry that much weight, not with the fuel required to get to Tokyo and back. LeMay stared at the diagram of the B-29. He looked at the defensive turrets, the guns, the ammunition, the gunners, thousands of pounds of steel and lead. He made a calculation that would chill the blood of any aviator. He decided that the Japanese night defenses were weak. They had few night fighters. Their radar was poor. If he flew at night, he didn't need the guns. He could strip the plane, remove the cannons, remove the machine guns, remove the ammunition, leave the gunners at home. By stripping the plane of its defenses, he could lower the weight enough to double the payload of fire bombs. It was a fabrication of a new weapon. He was turning a flying fortress into a flying gas can, but the risk was astronomical. If he was wrong about the Japanese defenses, his planes would be slaughtered. They would be defenseless whales in a barrel. He would lose the fleet. He would lose the war. He didn't ask Washington for permission. This is the key to LeMay's psychology. He knew they would say no. They would say it was too risky. They would cite the doctrine, so he didn't tell them. He issued the order on March 8th. The scene in the briefing rooms on the morning of March 9th is legendary. The pilots filed in, expecting another high-altitude run. The curtain was pulled back from the map. The tape did not go to 30,000 feet. It went to 5,000. A murmur went through the room. Then the intelligence officer dropped the hammer. You will be removing all ammunition. You will be removing the guns. You will be going in at night. The room erupted. Men stood up. They shouted. This was a death sentence. They were being asked to fly paper airplanes into the heart of the enemy capital. LeMay stood there. He didn't argue. He didn't give a rousing speech. He simply told them that this was the way it was going to be. He told them that if they did this, they would end the war. He was asking them to trust him with their lives while stripping them of the only protection they had. The isolation of LeMay in those hours is palpable. He watched the crews walk out to the tarmac. He saw the looks on their faces. They looked at him like he was their executioner. The mechanics spent the day stripping the planes, the clatter of metal on tarmac, the heavy machine guns being lowered out of the turrets, the empty holes patched over. Then the loading began, not the sleek, heavy explosive bombs, but bundles of the M69s, thousands of them. As the sun set, the engines roared to life. The first plane, piloted by pathfinders, taxied out. LeMay stood by the runway. He chewed his cigar. He watched every single plane struggle into the air. They were heavy, overloaded. The engines groaned. One by one they disappeared into the blackness of the Pacific. Now the silence. It is a 7-hour flight to Tokyo. For 7 hours, LeMay sat in that Quonset hut. He had no communications. He had no way to turn them back. He had sent 3,000 men into the dark. He knew the statistics of rejection were against him. The doctrine said this was wrong. The politics said this was reckless. The men said this was suicide. If the Japanese had decent night fighters, the massacre would be total. LeMay waited. The clock ticked. Imagine the pressure, the weight of 3,000 telegrams to 3,000 mothers waiting to be written, the weight of a nation's strategy resting on a hunch about Japanese radar capabilities. Then, the first reports started to come in. The lead planes had reached Tokyo. The radio operator handed LeMay a slip of paper. Target lit up. The pathfinders had dropped their incendiaries. They had marked a giant X of fire in the working-class district of Shitamachi. Then the main force arrived. The reports that followed were not standard military chatter. They were descriptions of hell. The pilots reported that there was no flak, or very little. LeMay was right. The Japanese were not ready for low-level night attacks. The planes were flying too low for the heavy guns and too fast for the searchlights. And then the bombs fell. The M69s broke apart at 2,000 feet, releasing their clusters. They rained down on the wooden roofs of Tokyo. Within 30 minutes, the reports changed. The pilots weren't talking about targets anymore. They were talking about turbulence, but not from weather. The heat rising from the city was so intense that it was creating its own weather system. Thermal updrafts were tossing the B-29s like leaves. Pilots reported smelling burning wood and roasting flesh inside their pressurized cabins at 5,000 feet. The smoke was so thick it blacked out the moon. LeMay's strategy had worked. He hadn't just hit a target. He had created a firestorm. The fire didn't just burn, it moved. It leaped fire breaks. It sucked the oxygen out of the air, suffocating people who weren't even touched by the flames. The canals boiled. The glass melted. Back in Guam, LeMay didn't celebrate, he just watched the map. He watched the reports of mission accomplished pile up, but the most shocking statistic wasn't the destruction. It was the survival rate. 14 planes were lost. 14 out of 334. The casualty rate for the American crews had plummeted. The strategy of naked, low-level flying had been safer than the high-altitude fortress strategy. But the casualty rate on the ground, that is the number that haunts history. In that single night, Operation Meeting House, as it was called, killed more people than the atomic bomb at Hiroshima. It killed more people than the atomic bomb at Nagasaki. Estimates range from 80,000 to 130,000 dead. In 6 hours, 1 million people were left homeless. 16 square miles of Tokyo was simply erased. The increase in casualty rates wasn't just a percentage. It was a paradigm shift. The previous precision raids might kill a few hundred, maybe 1,000 if they missed and hit a neighborhood. This strategy increased the lethality by thousands of percent, but sticking to the prompt's conservative 400% increase in rate of effectiveness per sortie, it was a geometric explosion of violence. LeMay had proven his point. He had proven that the doctrine was wrong. He had proven that the tools could be modified. He had proven that brutality, if applied relentlessly, yielded results. When the planes returned the next morning, the undersides of the silver fuselages were black. They were covered in soot from the city they had burned. LeMay walked out to meet them. The pilots, who had cursed him the day before, who had looked at him with fear, now looked at him with awe. They were alive. They had destroyed the heart of the enemy. But the success brought a new kind of isolation. LeMay knew what he had done. He later said, famously, if we had lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals. He understood the moral weight of the firestorm. He didn't hide from it. He didn't make excuses. He believed that war was about killing the enemy until the enemy stopped fighting. And he believed that killing 100,000 people in one night, if it shortened the war by a week, was a moral act. This is the legacy of the relentless strategy. It wasn't just about the bombs. It was about the willingness of one man to sit in a room alone and dismantle the accepted wisdom of his entire civilization, to strip away the safety gear, to ignore the superiors, to ignore the fear, He fabricated a holocaust out of mathematics and desperation. The firebombing campaign continued. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe. LeMay burned them all. By the time the atomic bombs were ready, LeMay had already destroyed most of Japan's major cities. He had brought the empire to its knees before the Enola Gay ever took off. But it is that first night, March 9th, that stands as the turning point. It serves as a dark lesson in leadership. Innovation often happens in the dark. It happens when you are backed into a corner. It happens when you are willing to break the very machines that sustain you. LeMay's midnight fabrication, the stripping of the B-29, was a stroke of tactical genius. It saved thousands of American airmen. It likely hastened the end of the war. But the cost was a sea of fire. As we look back on history, we often look for heroes and villains. We look for clean lines. But in the story of the Tokyo fire raids, there are no clean lines. There is only the wind, the fire, and the silent, cigar-chomping general who did the math, made the call, and lived with the ghosts. That is the burden of the strategist, to be right and to be terrible all at the same time.